Finally, we have come to that section. For the next few weeks, we're going to be studying Noah and the flood. And it's a very lengthy narrative compared to rest of what's happening in Genesis chapters 1 to 11. But we know that even longer narratives are awaiting us after chapter 11 when we get to the stories of the patriarchs. But today we begin the story of Noah. Okay? And I've titled the message for today, Obedience. That's going to be the key term. It's going to be pretty evident when we read that the key concept here is the concept of obedience. Okay, let's begin with chapter 6, verse 9, and we'll read it all the way to chapter 7, verse 5. Okay, let's read it out loud together. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both of them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening and 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I am going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. The Lord then said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and his mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and his mate, and also 7 pairs of each kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth for the 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Amen. So I've basically outlined this way. First of all, I want to talk about the concept of favor or grace and our righteousness. Now, we're not talking about the imputed righteousness here. We're talking about the actual righteousness in terms of our lifestyle. We would call that sanctification, sanctified lifestyle. And then I would like to talk on the theme of sin and judgment. And third, provision and covenant. And fourth, command and obedience. All these are very much conceptual ideas and very heavily loaded, theologically speaking. Okay? And we find all of that in this text that we are going to be studying today. But let's begin with one verse previous to that, and that was sort of like a culminating verse for last week's study, but I think it's also a sort of a good way to start today's lesson as well. And that is verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Okay? And that word favor is the same word as grace And we'll talk about that a little more later. Okay. Verse 9b says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Okay. So we know that Noah was a righteous man. He was living a life that was set apart from the general ways of the people of the world, and he walked faithfully with God. He had a relationship with God. He operated morally right. He, in character, was a righteous man, but at the same time, he walked very intimately with God. Now, what is the relationship, do you think, between God's favor or God's grace and our life of righteousness? Is there a relationship between these two? Because oftentimes we use the term grace to talk about receiving something that we do not deserve, right? Sometimes interchangeably with the term mercy, something that we do not deserve. We are unrighteous, and yet God shows His grace and mercy upon us. So what is the relationship between the righteousness of Noah and favor of God, the grace of God poured upon Noah?
We need God's favor to live righteously.
Okay. Do you think it is because Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord that he was righteous? Or he found that favor because he was righteous? Which comes first? In this case.
I'm thinking God initiates and we respond. So I'm thinking God's favor first.
Okay.
If we have to choose, I mean, it's like
Sure.
you know, life isn't all that simple.
Okay.
So it's probably synergistic, but
Okay. Let's go back to two other characters that we've studied, right? We studied Abel and we studied Enoch, right? They were also righteous. So was Abel righteous and he offered the proper offering because he experienced the favor of God or the grace of God was upon him? Or rather, because he offered in the right way, God's favor was shown to him?
the Bible says that God chose Abel and hated Cain, right?
Okay. Right,
So
right.
It shows God's sovereign predestination.
Okay. But would it be fair to say that to Cain? I mean,
God does a lot of unfair things.
what?
하나님이 unfair thing 많이 하잖아요. 사람이 보기에.
Right.
Yeah. So 그 question이 좀 wrong한 것 같은데요.
Okay. So why is it wrong? Because a lot of the
그렇게-
people in this world are asking the same question.
I know. 그러니까는 우리가 understand 못하게 하나님이 unfair하게 하는 게 많잖아요. 우리 수준으로 생각할 때. So of course, from our perspective, it is unfair that it happened to Cain.
Okay.
근데 이거를 뭐가 먼저고 뭐가 나중이고 이것보다 어쨌든 하나님이 generally 그냥 grace를 주시잖아요, 모든 사람들한테. 그랬을 때 이제 거기서 좀 그 grace를 받아서 righteous하게 사는 사람들이 나타날 것 같아요. 그러면 또 그 사람들을 더 하나님이 favor를 더 주시는 그런 식으로 되는 거지 뭐. 그냥 갑자기 뭐 이 사람 righteous해서 그런 건 아닌 것 같고 같이 가는 거 아닐까요?
But okay, let's look at the context. Okay, that may be our theology, right? We have been enriched by 2,000 years of, from New Testament on, 2,000 years of rich theological tradition. And all of us have seminary training, so we've been doubly enriched, right? But in reading of this text, we're trying to just be faithful to the text here. Okay? And so if you look at the sequence of the order in which the content is given, the first in order is that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That was stated first. That Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And then just a little later, it says that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Now, wouldn't you say...
행위로 의롭다함을 받은 거네요.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is the people are going to ask, oh, why did Noah find favor in the eyes of the Lord? Why? Why was he favored by God? And the logical answer would be, look, read on. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Isn't that logical order here according to the text?
What are you saying?
What am I saying? Jamie, help me out here. What am I saying?
I was
don't
trying to look
understand. I don't
for
understand what you're
Amy-
trying to get at.
Abel.
Yeah.
No, you see, we're coming with this theology.
Do you
Of-
want to ask if
Yeah.
노아가 페이벌이 있는 게 행위를 잘해서냐 아니면 하나님이 그냥 선택한 거냐?
Well, that comes later, but the question that I want to ask is that based upon this text, it's very disturbing that it just might be that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord because he was a righteous man. It seems like that's what simple reading would say that's the way it should be. I don't think we can say, oh, by the way, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's first. Therefore, Noah was a righteous man and blameless, and he walked faithfully with God. That seems like more of a New Testament, Ephesians 2:8 way of reading it. You know, we have been saved by grace through faith.
That discussion is like forever chicken first, egg first
Right,
kind of discussion.
right.
왜냐하면 그 노아가 하나님한테 페이버를 받을 만한 뭐를 했다 그래봐요. 근데 그 다음에 또 퀘스천이 어떻게 나오냐면 how? Like what made him to do it? 그러면 또 그 사람이 하나님이 정말 주신 어떤 할트가 있었다. 그러면 또 why only Noah?
Right.
이렇게 그럼 또 그거를 또
It comes back
선택받았다는
again.
거야?
Yeah.
선택받았다는 거야?
Sure.
그러면 왜 이 사람은 그런 페이벌이 없고 할트가 없고 라이처스하게 못 살았냐 이거죠. right? 그리고 그게 어디로 돌아가냐면 성악설, 성선설 그거로 돌아가는 거예요. 그러니까 그러면 케인하고 에이벌도 그렇고 이 사람과 반대되는 사람들은 태어날 때부터 악하게 태어나서 그거를 뭐 페이벌도 못 받고 라이처스하지도 못했다는 거냐? 아니면 뭐 노아는 뭐 처음부터 그렇게 태어나갖고 이렇게 선하게 라이처스하게 했다는 거냐?
Yeah.
right?
Well, let me put it the other way. Let's just change these wordings around a little bit. And let's say the first statement is true. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Right? Then could it be possible that the author would say something like, but Noah was an unrighteous man, he had a lot to be blamed for, and he was not very faithful in walking with the Lord? Could that go together with what was spoken in the previous verse?
그렇지는 않지만 그러면
Right.
이 사람이 라이처스 해갖고 페이버를 받았다 그래요.
Right.
그러면 from human perspective에서 이걸 어차피 썼단 말이에요. Right? The author is human. 그러면 when it says walk faithfully with God and righteous, that means always go back to 노아의 행위. 그러니까 행위로밖에는 저지할 수가 없는 거잖아요. 노아가 moral choice를 했을 거고
Right.
사람들을 해하지 않았을 거고
Right.
하나님이 기뻐하신 일들을 했다는 거 아니에요. 그러면 결국은 또 다시 뭘로 돌아가는 줄 알아요? 행위. 행위에 의해서 의롭다함을 받았다는 거야 노아가. Right?
But this is not just 행위. 이건 heart에서부터 나오는 행위이기 때문에 형식적인 행위는 아니야. He
근데
really
there's
had
no
a...
mention of
Yeah.
heart. With David there's mention of heart. But 노아는 mention of heart가 없잖아.
Yeah, I know, but what does it mean walking faithfully, being blameless? That has to do with character in a heart,
But
being a righteous man,
in
right?
church,
Right.
we don't know their hearts, but we see a lot of people who are walking faithfully
Right.
with God.
Right,
Right?
right.
So this might not even implying that there's heart factor or that language.
Okay.
Right?
Then another question that I can throw is, what kind of people do God select?
나도 모르죠.
Why did God select Abel?
I know.
Why did God select Enoch? Why did God select? We know that Enoch's case, right? It says that Enoch walked faithfully with God, and therefore God took him away. It seems like God's favor was upon Enoch because he walked faithfully with God, right? That's pretty clear, isn't it? Right? But here in Noah's case, it talks about the favor and the grace of God in a very special way. And that's why this is heavy theology right here, theology of grace. But what kind of person receives the grace? And then later we look at Abraham. Abraham receives the similar type of grace. But why does God choose Abraham?
그냥 취소하는 것 같은데요.
But you know what happened? Abraham was tested. And if he disqualified himself, that favor could have evaporated.
So basically what you're saying is 행동을 잘해야 하나님이 favor 준다는 거 아니에요?
No, that's obviously not what I'm saying.
I know that's not what you're saying, but 그렇게밖에 reading할 수가 없어요, right? 그리고 그 테스트나 어떤 그 faithfully walk하는 선택을 해야 했었을 때 이 사람들이 왜 이 사람은 이렇게 안 했는데 왜 노아랑 아브라함은 그렇게 할 수 있었냐는 거예요, right? 그러면 이 사람들이 뭔가 성장 과정이나 태어날 때부터 there was something in them.
Sure.
그럼 그거는 자기가 가진 게 아니야. 하나님이 풋한 걸지도 모른다는 거지. 그럼 결국은 결과론적으로는 이 사람들이 그렇게 자기네들이 righteous하게 행동을 했지만 결국은 끝에 가서는 처음에 하나님이 뭔가 이 사람들한테만 준 게 있는 것 같은데 이렇게 되잖아요. Right? So you cannot only say because they were faithful and they're blameless that they got favor, but way at the beginning there must have been some kind of extra thing that they had, right? That they were able to make this choice.
Let me throw some more questions, okay? I'm playing the devil's advocate here, by the way.
I'm passionate about this issue because I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, we've been
so
struggling.
much.
Yeah, we struggle with that all the time.
This is not just a spiritual issue, but counseling 해볼 때도 그렇고, psychologically 이거를 볼 때도 항상 그 secular people도 그 question을 하거든요. 왜 어떤 사람은 악한 짓을 하고, 왜 어떤 사람은 선한 짓을 할까? Right? I think it goes back to that.
Okay. Another question that I want to throw at you is this. We know that chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9, 4 chapters total, is about the flood. Right? It's a narrative about the flood. And most scholars will say, wow, this is like very important story next to the creation story, right? You know, all the skeptics today, the evolutionist scientists and all this, secular scientists, those are the two major areas that they're debating. They feel like if they can crush those two notions of God having created and God having salvaged people after destroying everything through the great flood, then they feel like they've won the argument to refute the presence of God or existence of God, right? So we say, wow, there are 4 chapters on the flood or related to the flood. But is this story really about the flood? Or is it about the man Noah? They want to do a portrayal of a man called Noah. And I'm going to tell you beforehand that here the statement seems so clear that Noah was righteous, blameless. He walked faithfully with God. He found favor with God. God highly regards him. You are truly righteous in this generation. All that. And you say, wow, Noah was an amazing guy. Look at what he did. He built this giant ark for all these years, and then he and his family, his 3 sons and his daughter-in-laws and he and his wife 8 people survived with all these animals. It's like a fantastic story, right? But at the end of that story, do you know what happens to Noah?
노아가 술 취해서
Right. He got drunk and he was lying naked. And again, the theme of being naked, right? Drinking from the fruit of the tree, right? And that was not a great sight. Because of that, one son was damned. And his descendant, Canaan, becomes damned, right? So that's not a good ending for this perfect man. He appears to be at the same level as Enoch, but thank God Enoch was taken away earlier. Sometimes I would say, God, take me away before I sin greatly or mess things up, right? And sometimes if we look at history, we feel like some of these people, if they went to be with the Lord a little earlier, the story wouldn't turn out to be so dark and tragic. But the story is not that beautiful for Noah, right? He's given the chance to start all over again, start afresh, and he also botches it up and messes it up. So I would like to ask you, in the next 4 chapters of study, and we're going to go through them swiftly. I think I'm going to do maybe 3 studies in this section. Focus on Noah. What kind of person was he? What kind of psychology was he operating with? What kind of burdens that he must be bearing? What's going through his mind? What's happening in his life? And I think the author wants us to identify with Noah and go through this together with Noah. But at the end of the day, there was something about Noah that God wanted to express his favor on. And we see similar stories with Abraham, do we not? And later his grandson Jacob as well. They had their flaws, they had their stumblings, they had those weak moments in faith. But something about them, God wanted to show favor upon them. What did God see about these people? And you cannot say, well, he just chose anybody anonymously, just, didn't matter. No, he did not. It is very clear in the Bible that the author is, especially in the Pentateuch, the author wants to make a point because he's speaking to the Israelites, right? And the Israelites, whether they are crossing over Jordan or whether they are recovering from exile and coming back to the promised land, the author wants to make a point. You have to live a certain way for you to find favor before the sight of God. Okay, I want to start off with that. Okay, let's get into more detail. Then I think we're going to really understand this more better. Let's read from verse 5 to 7. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. Okay? We read this before, right? In verse 5, we read this before, and I basically underlined this for you. Is it underlined there? I want you to accentuate the fact that God saw something, and God regretted it, and then God pronounced it, something. Okay? And so now, today we read verse 11 and 12. Verses 11 and 12. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. Once again, God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. And then in verse 13, so God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both of them and the earth. Okay. So what we see here with the flood story is that there's going to be a sort of reversal of what we saw in God's creation story. Okay? Remember, God saw what He has created and He said, this is good. But here it says, God saw something and it was not good. Okay? And in the creation story, when God saw that it was good, He was talking about creation of the land for the dwelling of human beings who are be ushered into this creation, be placed in the habitat in which they can thrive and grow and flourish and multiply. Right? So the land is a very important concept in Genesis chapter 1. But here is water which covers the land. It almost seems like God is saying, wait a minute, I created something good, and I pronounce that as good, and I bless that, so I create the whole land for you guys to survive on. But if I see that it is not good, I see that it is evil, it's filled with violence, it is corrupt, then I'm going to have to bring water on the land, and to a point that you cannot survive on the land anymore. But the important notion is that notion of God having regretted that He had made human beings on the earth, and His heart was deeply troubled. That is very, very intimate statement here about God. Do you remember that text in chapter 5, verse 29, in which Lamech, he names his son Noah, and he prophesies that he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. Emergence of Noah figure, and the term comfort is very much related to the name Noah. Noah, okay, is pronounced in Hebrew Noach. The word for comfort is Nacham. Okay? So you have these two words very much related and both mean comfort. Okay? Noah means comfort.
Noah means comfort too.
Yeah, comfort. But who is he to comfort? According to his father, he's going to comfort people who are going to be troubled because of the curse and the toil that has come upon, that they're going to have to endure through. But I'm just wondering whether the comfort is not only for humans, but perhaps Noah is there to comfort God.
사람 지으셨음을 한탄하사
야.
마음에 근심하시고 이렇게.
야, 그 한탄하사, 그걸 한탄이라고. 왜냐하면 deeply troubled, 영어는 deeply troubled가 두 번째 나오잖아요. But first, God regretted.
그거는.
야.
그러니까 차라리 사람 지으셨음을 후회하시고 그래요.
그래서 이 말은 뭐냐 하면
야.
하나님이 너무 마음이 아프고 괴로웠다는 뜻이야. If we're talking about anthropomorphic language. Yeah, I know. Because I think maybe you're right. Maybe those who translated it into Korean,
왜냐면
they would.
하나님 완벽한데 어떻게 후회할 수가
야.
있어 이러면서.
후회한다는 말이 들어갔어요? 히브리어 성경도?
Yeah,
오리지널이?
yeah, I could look at that. Let me see. regret does not necessarily mean 성경에 이제 가끔 그런 말이 있어요. That God changed his heart in the sense is God is very disappointed with 실망하셨다. 그런 뜻과 비슷하지. 실망했다는 것. You know? How could God be 실망할 수 있냐는 거지. Even that doesn't God gonna change in his emotion like that.
이제 human language.
God is supposed to be more stoic, we say. You know? God, 하나님 막 흔들리지. 여기는 하나님 막 흔들리는 거야. 인간은 그 저주로 통해서 흔들렸어. 하나님이 인간을, 인류를 진동시켜 놨어. Right? 그러니까 이제 노아가 등장하면서 노아가 인류를 다시 컴포팅한다. 그런 예언을 자기 아버지 라멕이 선포한 거예요. But what I'm asking is, in context, is Noah's primary job to comfort the people? Because if you think about how many people did he have to comfort? You know, only 8 people survived, right? But who is the real object of comfort here?
그래서 그게 하나님이라는 거.
I'm just asking, I'm just throwing that thought. And maybe God also is looking for people who could truly comfort him from his grief.
그럴 수도
In an anthropomorphic sense. I'm not saying that in literal theological speaking that God is disturbed and say, oh, I am in need. Come and comfort me. Why does God ask us to intercede and pray? Why does he ask him to join him, you know, in intercession? Why did Jesus say in the Garden of Gethsemane, of course he was incarnate God, why did he say, could you not pray 1 hour with me?
그러면 동추땡 하나님이 노아 태어날 때부터 이 사람을 선택한 거 아니에요? 컴포터로?
Kind of like that. I could identify with that. I could
Right?
see, yeah, I could see my daughters being,
그러니까 이제
you know,
그러면
source of comfort to me, right?
하나님의 선택은 sovereign한 거래 갖고 Noah was chosen by God to be a comforter, and then he grew up like that, and with that favor, he was able to walk faithfully. 그렇게 생각하면 안 되나요?
There's no guarantee. 그렇다고
Yeah.
work faithfully 하는 법이 없는 거잖아.
아 그런
안 할
법은
수-
없어요.
안 할 수도 있는
안 할 수도
Right.
있지만 이제 노아는 그렇게 했는데.
Sure.
그러면 본 he was born righteousness.
근데 사실 그 선택은 있긴 있었을 거 아니에요. 뭐 본 라이트.
Remember, 여기는 이제 genetic, 이러한 genetic science 이런 게 개념이 없었잖아. 그 당시에는, right? You know, 오늘날은 genetic factor, behavioral factor, psychological factor 이런 게 다 들어오는데 그 당시에는 very simple한 거야.
아 노아가 자랄 때 그런 얘기를 듣고 자랐나요? 자기 아빠한테? 라멕한테?
그래, I mean, we're speculating. All these are speculations.
그럴 수
But I guess
있겠다.
what I'm trying to say is that or the message that the author wants to get across to the people of Israel is that people, God has a heart. God has emotion. You know, don't take advantage of him. Don't just do whatever. You could wound him. You could grieve him.
grieve the Holy Spirit라는
Yeah, you could grieve the Holy Spirit. And I guess what the author may be saying is, listen, why do you think God shows certain type of grace upon certain individuals? Why does he do that? Not just from a utilitarian purpose of using them for his purpose. We think of it that way, very mechanical. God wants to use somebody, so he shows favor. He picks someone up, and he recruits that person, and hires them, and then commissions them. But it may be more than that. Maybe what God needs is somebody who can comfort him or who can give satisfaction to his heart. Like when we look at our little ones, right? And just having a child is such a blessing because, you know, they don't have to do anything for us. total satisfaction they give. And you know, when even the parents at times we suffer through, the child comes over and says, "Mom, Dad, why are you crying? Why are you sad?" That one word can just 아니 그럴 때도 있지. 너 때문이다 그럴 때도 있지만 너 때문에 아빠가 위로를 받는다. 이럴 수가 있다는 거지.
근데 그렇게
Because the Bible talks about in few verses that God searches throughout the earth for those who are truly right before His sight. 하나님도 그런 삶을 찾기를 원하는 거야.
근데 이거 되게 그러면 이 어떨이 굉장한 레벨레이션을 가지고 쓴 것 같은데.
I think so. I think because you
대해서 어떻게 그렇게 생각?
now just remember, everything is code. You know that Lamech prophesied this in that genealogy. He didn't have to. You didn't have to include that in, but he included. We think, oh, Noah's going to comfort the people, but how many people did he really comfort? All those thousands or hundreds of thousands of people perished in the flood, right? Noah didn't have a chance to comfort them. We don't see any of the stories there. Only people he could comfort is his family. Right? Then I would say if we're talking about 8 people that he would comfort, including himself, I think it makes more sense that he comforted God, who was grieved.
I see.
그러면은
No, that makes sense.
Deeply troubled.
Yeah.
I don't want
세상이 완전히
yeah.
코럽트 됐는데
Yeah.
노아가 이렇게 그래도 하나님
Mhm.
뜻을 캐리해 준 거잖아.
Yeah. So now let's go back. Okay, we say that Noach is related to Nacham. Okay, that guttural sound. Okay, I love that about the Hebrew, and even German. German has that too. German did it. Okay. 그런데 did you know that in that verse 8, Noah, which means comfort, is related to favor, which means chen. It's the reverse of the 2 consonants. Okay? So the author is doing a little bit of a play on words, because all throughout the Old Testament, the author's constantly into this. He uses that word. So if we look at the original text, we know that the author wants to relate these 2 concepts, comfort with favor or grace. In other words, chen is the reverse of Noach. In other words, if you bring comfort to God, God will bring favor to you. Okay? And maybe the reverse is also true. I think we're more familiar with the reverse. God gives you favor. Therefore, we participate in comforting God's heart through our righteous life. But see, today we become somewhat spoiled by the whole Reformed tradition. You know, that, we're saved. Once we're saved, we're always saved, and it's done deal, which I believe, basically. I don't doubt that. But the type of arrogance that people have, they're not living their life righteously, and they use those words and say, well, I'm guaranteed to go to heaven, but I'm going to live my life, whatever, here on earth. They have the audacity to take advantage of God in this way. And there's no room for that in the Old Testament. So, if you just think about this flood that is coming over the earth, and God is going to slaughter everybody. It seems like God is such a mean, vicious, heartless sovereignty, right? But what is the author trying to do when God is about to bring that kind of wrath down on His own creation? He's trying to say that God is so grieved. He's broken in his heart. And who's going to comfort him? Can he find some kind of evidence that this is worth all that he had created? And it seems like if he finds even one who is righteous, like Noah, he thinks it's worth it. He could have slaughtered everybody and started all over again, but he didn't. He salvaged 8 people, Noah's family. And he does the similar type of thing later with Abraham when he wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's looking for even 10 righteous. And for that he says, I will not destroy these evil and wicked cities.
근데 하나님이 디스트로이를 많이 하시는 것 같아요. Don't you think?
Yeah, like Jeremiah says, he's in the business of breaking down and rebuilding, and that's God does that. He has to destroy so that he can rebuild.
그 이렇게 세상이 코럽트했을 때 그렇게 플러드로 완전히 와이프 어웨이 하고 다 없애는 게 only way였을 것 같아요.
Well, okay, that's a good question. Why, at that period of time in history of humanity, that God had to resort to something like that? And then later he says that he regretted that he did that, so he promised that he is not going to do that ever, and he's going to give the sign of the rainbow.
근데
That he says, I will not destroy the earth with the flood like the way I have
근데
done.
다른 걸로 할 수도 있다는 거죠.
Well, I know that's what a lot of people say, but I think basically what God is saying is, I don't want to have to deal with it so severely like the way I did it.
아니, 우리
Now,
에스터데이 무비
let me-
봤는데
yes, right.
에스테로이드가
Right, we saw that.
그건 뭐지? 에스테로이드가 뭐지? 유성?
Oh, asteroid.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
에스테로 근데 휴먼가 거의
Yeah.
뭐 지구 사이즈 whatever.
Yeah,
그리고 지구가 멸망하는
Yeah.
게 있었거든요.
yeah.
그러니까 이제 와 근데 그게 무슨 뭐 엉뚱한 영화긴 하지만 하나님이 만약에 그렇게 하시려고 하면 why not, right? 뭐 one day 그렇게 될 수 있는 거잖아요.
Okay, maybe the part of the answer comes from rest of the context in the Old Testament, also in the New Testament. Let me give you 2 illustrations. When the Israelites they made their exit out of Egypt and they went to Mount Sinai. Remember, Moses was receiving the 10 Commandments, and down below, people were creating idols, right? And they were committing the greatest sin of idolatry. And God had to just basically slaughter all these people who took part in that, right? Okay? And then basically, melted the gold and made it into a dust form and put them in the water, and they had to drink it. And there was this tremendous judgment of God that came upon the people, even though he didn't slaughter all of them, right? Now, why such a radical type of judgment from God at that time? And also, in the New Testament, we see something similar too. When the church was just being established, there were this couple, Ananias and Sapphira, who lied to the apostles and they fell dead. Why did God bring such a horrendous judgment upon these 2 people at that time?
뭐
What's the similarity in pattern between these 3 stories?
단추를 잘 처음에
처음에,
끼려고.
right.
Yeah.
So at the very beginning of something, when it has to be right, 그래도 될까 말까인데, 그때 거기에 잘못된 어떠한 그런 요소들이 들어오면 God has to really basically nip it at the bud. We see that pattern. I don't know whether that's logical, but God seems to do that. And that's the only answer we scholars basically could come up with. You know?
그러면 뭐 그 플러드로 다 와이프 어웨이 하신 게 미닝이 있는 건가요? 아니면 뭐 플러드
He didn't wipe everybody away. He saved all these animals,
Yeah.
right? And of course the sea creatures are going to swim in the water.
Earthquake, it would have been fire, right? 왜 플러드였어? 그냥 월요일에 심발릭한 그런 게 있어서 그런 거 같아요.
Yeah, there's a symbolism to this water. We'll talk about that now. There's a lot of symbolism to this water, and actually to save these, the population of animals especially. I think this might be maybe the most logical way to save them. Now let's get into that, how he saved them. Okay? Let's read from verses 14 to 16. Now this is the instruction that was given to Noah for the building of the ark. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make room for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper deck. Okay, so we got the description of this ark, right? And by the way, 1 cubit is something like 1.5 foot. Okay, it's usually the length of this. They say your forearm, basically. I don't know. It may vary between people, but this kind of forearm. This is how they measured it in those days, right? So that means the size of the ark is something like 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. 450 feet. You know how big that is? I know today we have cruisers that's bigger, longer than that.
Football size.
Football size is 300 foot, right? So it's 1.5 the size of a giant football field. Just think about that, okay? Keep that in your mind.
Cruise ship 같네.
Yeah, it is like a cruise ship. And 3 decks, and specifically, and they had windows all around at the top deck, okay?
That's amazing.
So it's an amazing structure, but you might have heard about this in Williamstown, Kentucky. They actually have a replica of the ark. I saw the documentary. It's quite interesting. Of course, they got all these engineers, scientists, and they say they did it. Yeah, only thing they got is 450 feet and 75 feet and 45 feet. Rest of the others, the details not spoken of here. Only thing it was pitched. That is the pitch. That is waterproof type of material like tar. Okay, sticky material, so that it will not leak. But interestingly, the word for ark here. And by the way, this is not related at all to the Ark of the Covenant. That's different form of ark. Okay, the word is taba. You know where you find that same word? In the life of Moses. Moses. This is Noah, but we see in Moses when he was a baby. And the mother put this child in that basket, put a tar in it. The basket is known as taba. So 모세도 he's going to deliver his people, right? From the Red Sea, right? Well, Noah is going to salvage the people in this huge ark, kind of like a basket of salvation for the people, right? Okay, but once again, let's not get into the detail of this. It's not much of a detail, by the way, but some people try so much to get into what does the ark look like? How did they provide for the animals? And how did they administer all this? How did they get rid of the sewage and all that? Very interesting. We got tons of things that we can speculate about that, but that's not the intent of the author. Okay? Because if you want to get more meticulous about the design of the ark, then it cannot match the design of the tabernacle or the Ark of the Covenant that we see in the book of Exodus. Right? It's so much more detail about that in the book of Exodus. So, what is this story of Ark about? And what is Ark? What would be the parallel stories in comparison to the ark that we see throughout the Pentateuch? Building of the ark can somehow parallel that of the building of the tabernacle, maybe? The temple? Because the tabernacle for the Israelites was what really saved them. Because they would carry that around with them, right? Okay? And from the hostile tribes and hostility of the wilderness life, it was the presence of the Lord signified by the tabernacle and Ark of the Covenant which saved them. And likewise here, the ark in which Noah and his family are located, that's going to be salvation for them. And some scholars think that these two stories are also related to the story of creation. The way God meticulously creates all these living things, it's so much related to the story of the ark and the tabernacle. Okay. But the important thing here is that somehow God selects an individual and he commands a certain action of them. Build the ark. And later he says, go enter into the ark. Okay. Then he says, stay in the ark. And then finally, when it's the right time, he says, come out of the ark. There's all this series of commands given by God, and Noah abided by each of them. He carried out the command. And as a result of him carrying out the command, he receives God's blessing, and God confirms his covenant with Noah. And so let's read this statement about the covenant in verses 17 and 18. God says, I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will. See, this is the important thing. All this destruction that's coming their way, and then at the end of that, he says, and I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Sad and tragic as is, that all this destruction is going to happen. And the story gets even more darker when we get to next week. We read this detailed stories of water just coming and destroying everything, and the water remaining, and then, the people are just crammed in that ark with the animals, and all the smell, all the chaos that's going on, all the noise. Okay? And it's actually not a very comfortable and convenient type of scene at all. And yet, with that kind of chaos that's happening, he says, I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. The important thing is, the focus is always the covenant relationship with those who would enter into that. But that topic of the covenant, I'm going to reserve it for later, when we get to chapter 9, verses 8 through 17. Okay? Actually, today I could talk about covenant all I want, but I don't want to dwell upon that, except to just let you know that covenant has to be between two parties, coming to an agreement, coming to a commitment, whereby, in this case, one of the party is the sovereign Lord, and the other party is frail humankind. And basically God is saying, I will be your God, you will be my people. I will provide for you, I will protect you, I will prosper you. And I expect you to obey me and give your sole allegiance to me. And you follow my lead. Be holy as I am holy. Okay? And one more thing that I want to say here is that the ark signifies not only salvation for these people, based upon the covenant that God is going to make with these people, but ark also is a storehouse of provision for the people. Remember, they had to carry all this food, maybe grain, vegetable, or maybe plants. They had probably had potted plants, and they were growing them in the ark. Fruit, to have fresh fruit, they had to somehow be able to grow them in the ark. Now the question of eating the meat, was that after they came out of the ark? It seems like that's when God basically mandated that they could also eat meat. But some scholars think that all these clean animals, the 7 pairs of clean animals, are there so that they can begin eating in a consecrated manner.
근데 이때 벌써 그게 있었나요? 이거 나중에 레위기인가 뭐
Yeah,
나오는
yeah, we think that everything happened at Mount Sinai, right? But the author is trying to say, the same author who wrote Exodus and Leviticus, the same author is saying, hey, all those line of reasoning for all of that, we find a basis already there
아니 근데
in these
그
ancient
author이
days.
벌써 출애굽기 그 레위기 컨텍스트를 아니까 이 랭귀지를 쓴 건 아니에요. 근데 노아는 모르고 그냥 하나님이 명하는 대로 짐승들을 갖다 넣은 걸 수도 있잖아요.
Yeah, but the author, you see, it's the author who is telling the story. It's the author who is composing that story. So he knows all of those things that have happened. He's actually maybe experienced a portion of that, right? Whether it be, Moses, or later author who composed it or compiled it. Okay, we know that there's a distance between Moses and later during the exile and right before they would return back to the promised land. So we don't know which author we're talking about here, but let's just say that the final author who composed and compiled the Pentateuch as one book, okay? He knows all of these elements are there, so he just has to compose it in a certain way to get the message across. Now, if you're asking the question, but is that real? Did it really happen? Well, I don't think he's making it up, but I think he is speculating that these are somehow all connected, right? But the point that I want to get to is found in that final verse of chapter 6, verse 22. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Okay? And then in chapter 7, verse 5, same thing. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him.
진짜 노아가 착하긴 착하네.
Right? And we don't have to do any guesswork here. We know what the message is. The whole message is you do what the Lord commands you to do, and you will stay in His favor, and God will provide everything for you. He will save you. He will deliver you. He will protect you. Everything will turn out to be good at the end. Tov. If you simply obey Him. And this is the very mistake that Adam and Eve made. Especially Eve, according to the story. Because she took the matter in her own hand instead of trusting the Lord and simply obey what He had commanded her to do. And same thing that happened to Cain. When God gave him a chance to not take the matter in his own hand and learn to deal with it by reflecting on what he might have made mistake on or why he's struggling with all this, but he took the matter in his own hand and murdered his own brother, right? And Lamech, who boasted about the fact that he has all this right based upon some kind of law, some kind of protection that was given to him, and he boasted about that in an arrogant way, as though he's justified when that was an act of mercy, not act of justification, when he murdered a young man. So Noah is now reversing that curse by learning how to trust God for provision and obey God in the most simple way possible. So the whole story actually of this covenant relationship that Israel has with God and the church has with Jesus Christ is very simple. Acknowledge the lordship of God and you submit to that in obedience. And if we trust Him in all matters and simply obey what He tells us to do, then we are on the right track. And we will enter into the promises of God. I think the author goes the long way about bringing all these narratives, bringing all this suspenseful stories. We see that in next section. We see this dark image of the flood. And interesting thing is, at the very beginning, it seems like we're looking with God from outside, but then as the story gets deeper and deeper, we are swallowed up by the water. We're enclosed in the ark. And it's no more from the perspective of God anymore. We're now from the perspective of humans going through the trials. Okay? We'll talk about that. I think next week will be the most theodramatic of them all. Because it is so dramatic. I just read through that section once again before I talked about it. Well, then let's do it the week after, okay?
Oh, you're gone next week?
Yeah. So week after we gather together, we're going to be studying about the flood. So please, by next week, study the next section, rest of chapter 7, okay? From verses 6 on. Just read that story over and over and try to really get into that dark dungeon of watery abyss. Or find yourself locked up and cooped up in that ark for a period of something like totally a year. We know, right?
이 플러드가 일어나고 뭐 아라랏산 뭐 이런 데가 지금이 어디라고 해요? 어느 쪽?
Mount Ararat in Turkey.
터키 쪽에.
Yeah, actually I saw a photograph of what they think is the Ark of the Covenant. I wouldn't doubt it, but you can't go in there because the Turkish government has just fenced that area off, and you can't go there. But I don't doubt that it's there somewhere. And what we saw
뭐
from
있었는데 인공위성으로 뭐 찍었던
yeah, 찍었던 거, I mean, it's quite eerie if you think about it. Okay. So there is the actual existence of an ark that is preserved somewhere, and it is likely that area in Mount Ararat. Okay. But again, we're not going to go into her science of the flood or science of the ark and all that. I know that's what we've been doing all this time. And we get sidetracked instead of looking at the narrative from the author's intentional purpose and try to see what is the story that he's telling us and what's the message he's getting across to us. See?